everyone, welcome to my Sunday session in Conversation With, and today I'm speaking to Tushar Gandhi. Now, Tushar Gandhi is best known for having established the Mahatma Gandhi Foundation in 1998 in Gujarat, and now it's in Mumbai. In 2019, he became a director of the Gandhi Research Foundation in Maharashtra. He's the son of a journalist, Arun Manilal Gandhi, and he was born on a train between Mumbai and Kolkata. And of course, he is the great-grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian lawyer, anti-colonial nationalist and political ethicist who used the non-violent resistance to lead the successful campaign for India's independence against British colonial rule, and in turn inspired movements for civil rights and freedom across the world. Now, there is so much going on in the world right now. I thought it'd be really interesting to get Tushar Gandhi's thoughts on what his great-granddad would say at such a time, with the protests going on, the conversation and dispute around statues, and generally around the coronavirus pandemic too. And so it'd be really interesting, I thought, to get his thoughts and for him to share them with us today. So I'm just going to see, he has requested, so I'm just going to invite him on. Feel free to ask questions throughout this live conversation. It's completely open to you as well to ask any questions that you might have and get involved in our discussion.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello, Tushar Gandhi. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
I couldn't think of a better person to speak to at such a time when there are so many events happening around the world, and especially when Mahatma Gandhi, your great-granddad, has been in the news and you know, people, and there's such a conversation around him at the moment.
Yeah, he is somebody who, you can't ignore in any situation, at any time. He compels people to think of him, talk of him, and seek inspiration from him. Whether it is as an adulatory thing or even somebody to criticize. He just doesn't allow indifference towards himself. So from time to time we see that when humanity is facing a crisis, they start looking towards him for a solution.
And I do want to talk all about that, but I'm going to start with the coronavirus because we are in lockdown, and it's one of the reasons we're having this kind of Instagram live today, because of the coronavirus pandemic and everyone being in their homes. Many people are finding it a really difficult time, you know, facing mental health issues. They could be feeling anxious indoors. Some people have used it as a positive, you know, they've seen it from a positive perspective. What would Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy have been during this time, you know, at a time of lockdown?
I think his mantra would have been that we need physical distancing, not emotional distancing. The problems that we are facing, especially if you look at the issues of mental health and personality issues, are because social distances has also resulted in emotional insulation. And we don't have the kind of support infrastructure required by the society. It's also a very critical evaluation of our society that we have not bothered to have these kind of support system in place. And in a time of crisis, these shortfalls and shortcomings of our society too are coming to the forefront and troubling us. You see, we have sort of taken for granted that providing anything has to be the duty of our governments. Yes, governments have to provide things, but society also has to have that that support, that networking, that feeling of belonging, that is absent today. Not only, we in India, we used to love to say that Western societies are uncaring societies and things like that. But we in our urban areas are the same. You look at India, the panic-stricken exodus of our immigrant workers who had left their villages and come to work in the metros. Look what happened to them, how they realized that this city had nothing to provide for them in their
Yeah.
dire straits. And these are shortcomings of our society. They are not shortcomings. The government has failed, but this is not the time to sit and criticize them. I think this is the time when Bapu would have also looked inwards and said, where have I failed? What did I do wrong for this situation so to become so grim?
What would he have been doing? Because obviously we're all in our homes at the moment, but he was such a leader in the sense that he fought social injustice. Would he have been able to just sit at the table every evening to have these conversations, or do you think he would have been campaigning and getting his voice heard? What would he have been doing?
I think he would have been working where the requirement was the most, and knowing him and what he did during his lifetime in situations of a similar kind of pandemics, when at that time cholera and typhoid and the plague used to play as much havoc. And in all the instances, whether in South Africa or back home in India and in England, he volunteered to work amongst the afflicted. He provided nursing, he provided the services of cleansing the areas. He also worked to evacuate the dead bodies and deal with them in a dignified manner. So I think he would have left all the political questions aside, and he would have been working in one of the isolation wards in a corona health facility, treating the patients and assuring the doctors that we don't hold only them responsible for nursing our ill back to health. He would have been working over there
Would have been at the
amongst the
forefront.
patients. Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so inspiring. And of course, you carry on his legacy with the Gandhi Foundation, the ashram, through your work that you do, even this conversation we're having today. You're continuing his legacy, you're continuing his thoughts. I mean, what does that mean
Uh,
to you?
Unfortunately, I only carry forward the legacy as a ritual. The fact that I'm sitting over here talking to you while there is such a big crisis happening shows how much commitment I have to that legacy. If I was really a spiritual heir of my great grandfather, I should have been working amongst the living. I don't have that courage to do that. And so I would have to confess that in his on his yardstick, I would have been a miserable failure.
Well, I think that's extremely humble of you to say, but also thinking back to something that he would say is that we all learn from failures and mistakes, and he was of the he was very big on learning and
Absolutely.
learning through mistakes and failures. So, yeah, it's very humble of you to say, but I think that maybe in return he would have said that to you. And I can see a comment here by Mandy Jessel saying, "You are showing in your own way, and that is enough." Um,
I don't think that anything we do at the present moment is ever going to be able to convince the right thinking people that they're doing enough, because there's so much to do. We
there
are
is so much.
lacking so much. We're lacking so much in
Mm.
what we should have been doing, what we could have planned for and implemented for. And I think we all have to be self critical at the moment.
Mm.
That is of essence.
I think, you touched upon and moving towards the current politics of the day, that there is you could call a raising consciousness, and people are being critical of the landscape they're living in, self-critical towards their own behaviours, especially with anti-racism protests.
Yes.
And just to give people a slight background on this, because Mahatma Gandhi has suddenly come into conversation as being a divisive figure, particularly with anti-racism protests and particularly by black people who were saying that he was racist because at the time that he fought for civil rights, he excluded the black people narrative. And of course, you know, here there's been a petition in Leicester saying remove the Gandhi statue. And Keith Vaz, the MP here, has said that he will personally defend that statue. And of course, for many Gujaratis living in Leicester, it represents them coming from Uganda. And on the other side, you know, Donald Trump has defended the statue, saying it's a disgrace that it was vandalized in the US. What are your views on this and the removal of the statue, and how does it make you feel about this dispute?
I think if people feel that way, they have the right to know if the statues are not removed on their demand, they have the right to destroy those statues. I would say, please destroy all his statues, but don't make others victims of your anger. It will be better to destroy his statues and do away with him if you feel that he is a hateful figure. The problem over here is that we are judging Mohandas Gandhi on the pedestal of a Mahatma. Because we venerate him as a Mahatma, we feel that he has to be perfect and blemishless. And he himself, if you read his autobiography very honestly confesses to all the mistakes that he made in his life. But what also the reader will understand is that while confessing the mistake, he wasn't just merely saying, sorry, I made a mistake. When he said, sorry, I made a mistake, he was ensuring that he would never ever repeat that mistake in his life. And if you look at his life, you will realize that he never committed that mistake ever again. And the fact that he used racist slurs, which are today considered to be racist slurs, in his writings in South Africa is an undeniable fact. But we must also understand that at that point of time, he had a very limited worldview. He was a boy from a small town in India, from a very orthodox family, whose only exposure to the worldview was his years in England, where he went to study law. And he picked up the vocabulary and the term and terminologies of Victorian Indian, where these terms were freely bandied. I'm not justifying that, but that was the exposure he had. And when he went to South Africa, the natives were a brand new experience for him. He had not come in contact with anybody of that race before. And at that time in South Africa, the natives were very normally referred by those hateful racist terms. And it's very natural that a naive man who did not have a worldview, whose worldview was not mature enough, did not realize that he was using a wrong, racist, hateful term, and he should not be doing that. But then look at what he did during the Zulu uprising in South Africa, where he once again volunteered to provide relief on the battlefront. And when he went and saw the brutality and the savagery of the British soldier towards the native, and how nobody was willing to give them aid or treat them, he took it upon himself to give them aid, treat them, nurse them back to health, and help re-establish the survivors in those villages. If he was a racist, he did not have to do all that. And so I think that it is very unkind to judge him by his words. Now they say that he did not, when he fought for equal rights for his people, he did not fight for the Africans. You must understand at that time he was an Indian protesting against the inequality of Indians who he considered to be equal citizens of the empire. And he was protesting for his people and for Asians who were being left aside.
Yeah.
He had not taken on the mantle of being a world leader. If later on in his life, if he was to go back, he would have realized that his responsibility was also for the native community who was being victimized as savagely.
I mean, that's
And he
exactly
did
what
in
I
his
was.
writings. Later on, he did. And
And
that
that's
is where he inspired leaders like Martin Luther King and much, much later in his life, Nelson Mandela also.
And that's exactly what I was going to come on to, because, one of his quotes was, freedom is not worth having if it does not include the freedom to make mistakes. And if he was alive today, do you think he would say it was a mistake not to include the rights of black Africans in his fight for the freedoms of Indians living in Africa under British rule and in India?
I don't think he would have said it was his mistake. He would have said that I wasn't equipped enough to fight that big a battle at that point of time. He was still growing as a leader. He was still understanding his own abilities. He was always in doubt about even being an effective representative of his community to start with. You see, you must understand the fact that he was a person who was also changing in the African period from being a very timid, meek person to becoming a public figure. And so it takes time for those things to happen. Yes, he would have admitted that there was a need to represent, but he was also interacting with the leaders of the native people in South Africa, with Dube and all those leaders who later on went on to establish the African National Congress in them. He was having dialogues with them. He was sharing strategies with them. And so it is very unfair to say that he completely, because he was a racist, he did not deal with the issues of the native Africans over there. He was interacting with them, but he was an ordinary human being who was trying to do what he could, what he believed was his capabilities. And he did it to the admirable level. And today,
Well, of
the
course, yeah.
accusation against him is because he was so spectacularly successful in representing his own people that the others feel that why didn't he represent us? And I can agree with it and I can sympathize with it. But we must also understand that he was an ordinary human being. Let's not make him a god. Let's not put him on a pedestal. And that's why I say break all the statues, demolish them. But then let's start the healing process, because we are also wounding our society, because the danger is that if we counteract hate with hate, then hate is going to increase, not decrease. And we must guard against that.
And what I must also ask, I mean, talking about a human level as well, I mean, one question a lot of people are asking is what would Winston Churchill and Nelson Mandela have said about the protest today? And, all three, including Mahatma Gandhi, they were all leaders of their time. And they've had, they have the good and the bad. There's no disputing that. What do you think they would say, especially considering there are, what do you think that those three would say, the leaders of their
Well,
time?
Winston Churchill was a royalist. He was an imperialist. He thought about the empire. So, considering him to be compassionate towards people whom he only looked as subjects or things, I think it would be a bit far-fetched. Nelson Mandela, we don't have to talk about him. He would have, but I'm sure Nelson Mandela also would have warned that we must not succumb to the temptation of reciprocating hate with hate, because then hate will be compounded and the society will suffer because of that. And today we see that there is a lot of anger. The anger is justified. There's no doubt about it. But anger must become an energy to bring about change and not an acid to destroy what is wrong. Because unless we change that, unless we correct the wrong, society is going to be wounded. And I think although I completely empathize and sympathize with Black Lives Matter, because in the US, that is the question at the moment. But then justice must be for everyone. And in the Western society, in my country also, we see that there's so much prejudice, there's so much subjugation, there's so much brutality in our behavior we are with one another. All that needs to change.
And of course,
We
you
need
took
to
part in the
create,
protest, didn't you, with the Citizenship Amendment Act in India? And
well,
the same.
every right thinking person has to step out and take a stand. We cannot say that this doesn't concern me anymore. If Black lives matter, then they matter to me also.
How do you suggest people take the protests and take their voices and make sure they are heard along with the healing? Because you've talked about we are healing wounds. How do you suggest that people take this forward now to implement real change?
Well, if we just take, if we consider the racism rampant, what has triggered this whole movement, the brutal racial attitude of the American police force, then I think what needs to be done is that the administration needs to be told, the police themselves need to be made aware of their unacceptable behavior. We cannot, if we just tell them that you're all savages and brutes and racist thugs, then they'll say, one fine day, they'll say, okay, we are that. We'll behave in that manner. They have to be made to understand how unjust and unacceptable their behavior is, and that there is a better way to do it.
And of course,
There is a better way to do it, and make them understand that, make them deal with their own unjust behavior, their own prejudices, make them accept that. Unless there is an acceptance, there is not going to be a transformation.
And of course, on that note, the Minneapolis councillors said that they will be reforming the police structure there, and Donald Trump has said that he won't be, introducing any radical reform, but will introduce some training. And on the note of President Trump, you met him, was it last year? And he was the first US sitting president to visit the Mahatma Gandhi ashram.
Oh, no, I didn't meet him. I would never go and meet him. I wasn't invited, but I'm not interested in meeting Mr. Trump. I don't hold him in great regard.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, because I was going to say, what was the meeting like? Because the ideologies of Donald Trump
he
and
was a very
Gandhiji are so
reluctant. If you look at the pictures and the videos of him at the ashram, you would have realized that he was a very reluctant visitor over there. He just wanted to get over with the photo ops and get out of there. So it didn't make any difference. Neither did it make any difference to the Gandhian philosophy, nor did the Gandhian philosophy have any influence on that man. So it was just a waste of time.
But does it surprise you then that he has defended the statue, Mahatma Gandhi statue in the US, and said that it's a disgrace? And he said, I visited the ashram, and he spoke about it.
You should see what he wrote in the visitor book of the ashram. Then you'll realize how much effect that visit had on him.
Oh, gosh.
But I must admit that Melania was looked much more sincere in the visit, and much more receptive towards the objective of that visit.
Yeah. Well, I really hope to visit one day, so I hope I get to see his comments in the book. And talking about everything that's happening in the world, you are carrying the legacy. I mean, you've been very humble at the beginning and said you could never do as much as your great-grandfather did. But what do you say, and how are you bringing the Gandhi name into the 21st century so that it is relevant?
I think I don't need to do anything to keep it relevant, because, as I said, that it's not the man. You see, the man is important to me because he's my great-grandfather and I descend from him. But what needs to be kept alive and effective is the ideology. And for that, we all need to be seen to be practicing that ideology. Unless, we inspired by our actions, our words are not going to have much of an effect on people. And now, especially when we start rebuilding the post-corona society again, I think it is very essential that we are seen to be practicing what the message that we want to give to the world. And so I think my work is cut out, but my priority is to lessen the hate in this world. I see a great resurgence of hate in this world on all sides. On all sides, we are becoming us and them, us and them, us and them on every issue. And I think that is something that worries me the most. And if I, I don't know how much life I've left with me, but whatever life I'm gifted with and so forth, I think I would love to work to reduce hate in society.
What does that work look like? Because there are lots of people watching, and many people watch this back and be wondering how they do put their words into action to cause an effect, to reduce hatred. How do you propose that could look like in action?
I think what we need to do is start practicing the quality of forgiving people. We carry grudges for too long. We carry grudges as individuals and collectively for too long. And somewhere or the other, those are the grudges which evokes the necessity for vengeance, for redressal. We'll call it redressal because these days we say we need redressal, but it's vengeance in an acceptable term.
What about if
And we
someone,
need
just on
to,
that note, what if someone says it's justice?
justice is not revenge. Justice, the real justice, the ideology of justice, if we are to go to the fundamental of it, is to rectify the situation so that the acts will not happen anymore. And that's where what Bapu said and what Jesus and Buddha and everybody said in their time, and Muhammad also, if you look at it, said the same thing: hate the sin, not the sinner. We have started hating the sinner, and we've sort of started ignoring the sin in our focus of hatred against the sinner. And I think we need to change that focus, that perspective, and focus back on the sin rather than the individual or the group that practices it.
Mm-hmm. And you have left this on a perfect note, but if I could just ask you to just give one lesson that your great grandfather shared with the world that you have really adopted in your everyday living, or you try to adopt as best as possible, what would that be that you could share with us all today?
Well, my life's philosophy has always been to understand my limitations and work within those limitations, and not be uh, ambitious to change the world overnight. I think my life philosophy has been of the Japanese ideology of kaizen, where you take small steps and uh, see that those small steps are effective, and pray that they make a difference. And I have my experience tells me that difference happens when you are sincere and when you are honest and when you are aware of your limitations. We generally don't do things because we are looking at the grander picture and we want to make a grand difference on the world scene. And that's where we don't do anything. But if we have the humility to say that I'm going to work within my limitations, my abilities, and if there is an effect of my work, I'll be very happy. If there isn't, I'll try again, try more. And I think I live by that, and I'm very happy to live by that ideology.
And I think that completely echoes Mahatma Gandhi's saying of be the change you want to see in the world. So, Mr. Gandhi, thank you so much for your time today. I know that loads of people have been watching. We've had lots of thumbs up. I think people have just been enjoying the conversation. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Anila, for this opportunity, and let me wish all your viewers and audiences very a good life, a healthy life, and a peaceful life. Thank you so much, and same for you, Anila. Thank you.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.